Alright, Shalom Akim, Kahala Imla, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Ruchakudash, and double honors to the great Muslim apostles and the elder bishops of Great Millstone, Thadi Al Thadi Yahushai for the strength in order to make this video. And Yaratazar, you find this video edifying and exhorting. So, those of you who are into your superhero movies, especially the Marvel ones, or Marvel DC, whichever one you favor, even if you watch both. Generally, if you are into your superhero movies, you'll know where I took this screenshot from or this picture from. Because lately I've been watching the Amazing Spider-Man 2. You know, I was watching part 1 and then I decided, okay, let me watch the part 2 as well on Netflix. And then, of course, you know, just from the mere power. In fact, before I even start speaking on that, let me just say the backstory of this individual here. Of course, played by Jamie Foxx as the Marvel character called Electro. And the thing is, he was seen as the one, well, not seen, but really he was the invisible one. He was overlooked by everyone in the workplace. And in spite of being invisible, overlooked, you know, of course, he still did his work. He still kept it somewhat respectful. He had his moments. If you watch the movie, you know what I mean. He had his moments of meditating on terror. You know, wanted to get back on the heathens, man. Really, this can be likened as the typical experience of the Israelite man, being overlooked. You know, seen as an individual of whom, you know, you just treat like shit. It depends on what type of place you're in, but typically you know, whatever community you may be a part of. It could have been school, could have been, you know, in a workplace and so on and so forth. But he was overlooked. He was the invisible one. He was disrespected. And I think in this moment here, before he charged up, you know, it was like whatever, you can say the spirits were speaking to him, you know, in his head and saying, you know, they hate him, they lied to you, they lied to him, you know, they hated you. Essentially just fueling his anger. So, you know, I was even meditating, what am I going to name this video? But I believe I'll name it something along the lines of, we will be tools of judgment. So yeah, how Bashim Yahushai will use us, you know, to judge these other nations. Of course, in the kingdom, that's what we're going to do. But even prior to that as well, when the spiritual power comes, that's what we're going to be doing. So nevertheless, just for the context of the character, as I said, he was invisible. He was disrespected. You know, that word again, disrespected, you know, in the workplace. And even another thing as well, he was the one who designed, I believe he did mention that he designed the architecture of the building, you know, the Oscorp building. This is just one portion of the movie, man. So, and this movie came out a long time ago. Most people probably would have watched it. But if you haven't, in the UK, it's currently on Netflix. Of course, if you want to watch it, you know, and you got a VPN, a good VPN, then you can switch it to the UK location, a VPN, and then you'll be able to watch it on Netflix. If you have a VPN on your computer or on your phone, then you'll be able to do that. All right, so he was disrespected, he was overlooked, and he was the one who built the infrastructure of the place. He was the electrical engineer. You know, so really that's just the context of just to understand why I'm making this video, because this represents the journey of the Israelite man. Because right now, yeah, we are also disrespected, you know, in whatever communities that we may partake in, or overlooked, or seen as inferior to the rest. But this is when, of course, applying wisdom is essential. Because all of a sudden, after he got the power, he was getting that attention. Now, of course, in the movie, he had some mishaps as well. You know, ego was part of it too. You know, but I believe it was for the sake of his sanity. You know, he needed that self-talk. You know, no one wanted to. No one respected his so-called birthday. So, which we don't celebrate that anyways, because it's all part of this self-righteous act. We're born, be grateful every day, say Thawdi how Thawdi have shad done deal. You ain't gotta celebrate no birthdays, which that just goes into celebrating idols as well. When you do the research on the origin of birthdays, some Egyptian custom. But I ain't talking about that right now. So he was overlooked, he was disrespected. As an Israelite man right now, the so-called Negro man, the so-called Latino man, the so-called Native American man, they're disrespected, in Esau's kingdom. And as well as these other heathens, they also disrespect him too. So the point is that in spite of the disrespect, we're going to get that spiritual power. I just took a few images once I saw that moment. I was like, I have to do, a video on spiritual power based on this. Because it shows those of whom are weak will be made strong. As the scriptures say, the last shall be first. So those of us of whom are last in terms of power in this general society, Yahweh Shem Yashai will bestow us with immense power. Immense power. In fact, this is just an inkling of that power. Akim are gonna be able to switch between different types. You got Electro, obviously Spider-Man with his power being able to swing if you want to travel like that. Some bros are going to want to run like the Flash. Speaking of sparks or Flash, electricity and all, let me get this precept. This is Wisdom of Solomon 3 and verse 1. The key part should be in verse 7. But yeah, starting from verse 1. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of the Most High, and there shall no torment touch them. So we'll be protected even in the time where we have to go through suffering. Yahweh Shem Yashai will preserve us. So it's essential to have faith in these words that He's given us, doubting nothing. Verse 2, in the sight of the unwise they seemed to die, so those of us of whom will be destined for death, however way that may be in Esau's kingdom, where those who reject the MOTB will be seen as rebels, and of course they'll be killed, used as an example of what not to do against Esau. But we don't fear man, and the point is to stay in that state where we have our faith in our power, so that fearlessness towards Esau stays that way and increases, where we don't care about man's words. Because of death, that's also a very potent tool Esau uses to to make people fear, to shiver, to make them agree with what he's doing. Death typically is the highest form of fear to use, if you get my drift. So verse 3, and they're going from us. Let me read verse 2 again. In the sight of the unwise, so those of whom don't have the wisdom of the scriptures, who don't have the understanding to see that the folks that are being crucified right now, especially the Israelite man, they're going to be rulers in the kingdom, in the next kingdom. And those who don't have their spiritual eyes open won't be able to see that. So they're really the unwise, the ones who reason on a carnal or short-term level. So in the sight of the unwise, they seem to die, and their departure is taken for misery. And they're going from us to be utter destruction, but they are in peace. And it's true. Once you die, you go to the spirit realm, typically. But of course, those of us who die in that time of the MOTB system are just going to be awakened to Yahushua's kingdom. And rightfully so, they'll be the first of whom would then be raised up to those chariots. And they're going from us be utter destruction, but they are in peace. For though, and of course, Ecclesiastes 12, and about verse 7, the body goes to the grave, to the ground, and the spirit goes on to the one who created it, which all glory, all credit goes on to Yahweh. So, of course, that's the point there. And it says, for though they be punished in the sight of men, yet is their hope full of immortality. And of course, why is our hope full of immortality? Because we know our Savior, Yahweh Shai, which is literally what his name means. Yah meaning he, and then Hawashai meaning deliverer, or delivers, or saves. So he saves. He's going to save us in these times where we're going to get the enemy as a flood, which I'm going to get a precept on that soon. And it says, and having been a little chastised, so with the suffering, it says, and actually before I read that, it says, for though, so back to verse 4, Wisdom of Solomon 3 and 4, for though they be punished in the sight of men, and that could mean in all sorts of ways, prior to actually being, physically punished, whether that be torture in that time. There's also the humiliation, which can be seen as a punishment. People again disrespecting you, putting you in a lowly state, which really the Israelite man has suffered that even more so, because we all know how the scriptures have said about the woman. A woman shall compass a man in Jeremiah. So really it's the Israelite man that be suffering way more than the woman in the grand scheme of things. So verse 4, it says, yet is there hope. Hope really is it goes into what you expect to happen. Your expectation is full of immortality. And that's true, because remember, we're working towards a reward of which will aid us, will give us eternity. And that's through our service to Yahweh Shai. This is what we're seeking. We're seeking a kingdom where we wouldn't have to be suffering no more, and we don't have to tolerate any evils. All right, verse 5, and having been a little chastised, yet it may seem like much right now, but then when you compare eternity to a little blip of time, you then start to realize, damn, that was actually quite little. And that's going to be us in the perspective of, us being in the kingdom and actually examining ourselves, our past lives as well, and what we did and what we had to go through. And it says, having been little chastised, they shall be greatly rewarded. And remember, we have the mercy of Yahweh Shem Yahushua, because if there wasn't no mercy, it would have been too much of a chastisement. Let's just leave it at that. So they shall be greatly rewarded, for the Most High proved them and found them worthy of himself. So those are the ones who endure to the very end, to the point of salvation.